Hello, Central Oregon, and welcome to Talk Real Estate with Fred Johnson. I'm your host, Fred Johnson. Happy to have you with us today. We've got a number of different issues, and as I gave you at the top of the hour there, please feel free to call in at any time, 541-388-1110. Love to have you talk and put you on the air. You know, we've got a number of things that we're going to talk about today. Today's Statistics Day. We've got all of our statistics, so I'll talk about our trends and those sort of things. I don't want you to tune out, but really, you know, all in all, the real estate market is looking pretty stable. And, you know, there's some misinformation that's out there, and hopefully we'll be able to get to the bottom of that a little bit. There's a couple of changes that are happening in lending. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about Juniper Ridge. There's a couple of issues that are coming there that I think that are a call to action. And then there's a new Central Westside plan, which some folks are working on, which I find pretty curious and pretty interesting. So hopefully I'll be able to share that with you. And if there's any things that you would like to discuss on today's show, please feel free to call in. It's really a great time here in Central Oregon. For many of you, the kids are back to school this week. It's been interesting to see how the traffic flows sort of come and go and back up in some of the areas where the schools are located. And I think it's fairly indicative of what is going to happen moving forward. You know, some of those areas, the one thing about the roundabouts that we've implemented all over town, they're really good up to a point, and then they back up pretty quick. And my office, as many of you may know, is there on Newport Avenue, which is also one of the crossings over the river. And it's really kind of interesting to look out the window and see when that backs up and how far it backs up and how difficult it is to get out of the driveway. And, you know, hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about this new Central Westside plan. A couple of things that have been interesting in our real estate market. You could really tell this time of year as school is settling in, and you know we're really kind of maybe winding down a little bit off of the summer season, and the activity level. You can tell by the number of people calling in and asking questions, you know, as a sort of as a gauge of the activity level that's out there a little bit. And you know, this last couple of weeks, you know, it's been a little difficult with the stock market. To really string together a few days of good, stable economy, and then there's been discussion on whether or not the interest rates are going to move up or not. There's also some changes that are going to be implemented this next week on September 14th with FHA, and FHA lending has basically scrapped their lending program, and they're going to start anew. And from many of those people that are in the know on the inside of that, they claim that you know, if you're close and think that you want to put in a loan application, that you've got a few days to do it before it's going to get a little bit more difficult to get that FHA financing that we have all, you know, come to enjoy and sort of take for granted, if you will. So I don't really know exactly what those changes are, but the article that I did read basically said straight up that they didn't amend some of the issues. They didn't tweak some of the issues. They totally scrapped the program and decided to start anew. So I gather there's going to be some sweeping changes in the FHA program. And I don't know about the rest of you. I try really hard on this show to, you know, try to be as neutral as possible. But, you know, this whole political thing is just getting to where it's unbelievable. I mean, every single day there's something new, and it's not just the national politics, it's our local politics. It's interesting to see how the information that we're receiving is important, and some of it, you know, isn't really so important. But you know, again, if you're thinking, you're thinking that this might be a good time to get into the market, there appears to be a fair amount of inventory. Interest rates are really, really low. It's really a great time to get out there. One of the things that I wanted to also mention today, as a matter of fact, I got an update right before I came in, and that's to really qualify, again, how we receive our information. You know, a lot of us go online, and just because something is posted online, we just basically take it as 100% factual, that you know, the motivation of this information that's put out there has our best interests in mind and isn't necessarily doesn't have the provider's best interest in mind. And with that, I'm not trying to bash them, but when it gets to Zillow or it gets to Trulia and it gets to some of these online real estate information providers, their information just isn't 100% correct. It's really, really difficult to aggregate information using what they call an algorithm of the computer system to be able to, aggregate this data and put it together and come up with really accurate numbers. And whether that's the accurate number for your home, whether that's the accurate number for the sales activity of what's happening in your immediate area. And as in today's report, there was even a crime report from the city of Bend that was added there. So, if you will, sort of when you're doing some of your recreation reading, if you would look at Zillow and Trulia a lot the same way, that it's sort of a baseline. It gives you some idea of some of the information, but just because there's a Zillow's estimate of value either on your property or a property that you're potentially looking at doesn't necessarily mean that it's 100% accurate, because nobody from Zillow, quite frankly, has been in that property and knows whether it's been totally remodeled or it's been totally torn apart with renters in recent years. So the information, to be truthful, they sell advertisement. They sell advertisement on both sides. Any of the service providers that would like to put ads in, they can put ads in there. Different real estate brokers and service providers can contract with Zillow to get leads from their area, and then thereby participate in the fees or the commissions on the back side of that. So again, the purpose of those businesses is not necessarily to give you unbiased information about your property that's 100% real time, real accurate. It's to draw your interest to the site so that hopefully you'll support the advertisers that are there, so continued advertisement can be sold. So I just had that this week one time where it was put in my face, where it was, hey, the Zillow's estimate said it's this value, and it was just sort of amazing that people just take that as 100% the gospel truth of what's happening in the market, when more frequently than not, it's not 100% accurate straight across the board. So anyway, so much for Fred being off on his box there today. When we get back here in a little bit, I'll be able to go through our statistics. The statistics are pretty good, pretty stable. We're not showing any huge growth of inventory. The activity level is starting to taper off a little bit. In the city of Bend, there weren't as many building permits pulled. In the city of Redmond, it's relatively stable. But the interesting thing that we're starting to see in that is that it's just a huge amount of the activity that happens in the area. As much as we hear time and time again that we're getting priced out of the market, things are going off the top and all that sort of thing. And the reality is, and I'll give you some actual numbers when we come back, but the absolute bulk of the market is right square in the center of the price point. And in Redmond, that price point is a little bit lower, and there seems to be a little bit more inventory at that end of the market. So I'll give you some actual numbers that you can, get your pencil sharpened and write it down. And of course, you can always go to my website, which is just simply askfredjohnson.com, or you can email me at fred@dukewarner.com. If you have any questions, if you'd like any information, if you'd like to talk more about something that we've discussed on the show, you've got total access to me. So when we get back after the break, we'll be able to go into some of this, as well as talk a little bit about the Westside plan and Juniper Ridge. And I want to thank you very much for tuning in to Talk Real Estate.
Yeah, this is Mike calling from Bend, Oregon.
Hey, Mike from Bend, Oregon. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. I'm not clear on whether we're on the air or not, but I'm ready to go.
We are on the air somehow or another. Anyway, we're on the air now. They let me try to run the board myself, and I'm not a technician, so I made a little mistake there and pushed the power button at the wrong time.
Yeah, nothing ventured, nothing gained, right?
Well, I'm really fortunate to have supporters like you that allow some mistakes on my end. What would you like to talk about today?
Well, first of all, I want to salute you. You were being very right down the middle, trying not to play either side of the local land and UGB issues.
Well, thank you for that.
I sketched out a few things trying to reflect that balance that you show.
Uh-huh.
First of all, the planned expansion of the Westside blocks Bend's future in 5 ways physically.
Okay.
Aubrey Butte, the Parkway, the downtown core, and the river.
Uh-huh.
All these things block off the future of expansion on the UGB on the west side, or including the university. Now, in 2005 to 2008, citizens, county, the municipality got together with a thing called the UGB expansion, which was a fantastic thing to help us get our land prices under control.
Uh-huh.
Somehow, in the last 10 years, that has been entirely forgotten, and instead of a land-grant university receiving 300 acres from the city council, they bought a multi-million-dollar property that has more millions of dollars that have to be put into it in order to use it. So it's ridiculous upon ridiculous. But what I really want to get to is the plan that all the citizens had.
Yes.
Was to come up with hundreds of spare lots that individuals like you, me, KBND, or a radio station could actually go buy a lot, and then as the years pass, the land value goes up, they divide their property in half, they pay off their mortgage, and Bend thrives. The current site that's planned for the university extinguishes every positive aspect and also limits access to the university using traffic, infrastructure, and so on.
Some points very, very well taken, Mike, and I really, really appreciate you calling in today. And I agree with a good portion of what you're saying there. That there's some geographic boundaries. I think that one of the things, I told somebody yesterday, just because if the cake's good, then it doesn't really make any difference what frosting you put on top. But if the cake isn't good, it doesn't make any difference how good the frosting is. It's not going to make up the difference. And it seems that we receive an awful lot of information and press about aesthetics, but we don't really get down to the core issues that really make that all possible. And, two things in my mind come to mind in this development that we're discussing today. And one is the infrastructure side of it. What is the traffic plan, and are we really going to have sufficient sewer to be able to provide sewer to these areas that are expanded? And then secondly, the traffic network, how it's going to go, and the sewer. Those are the two main things. On the west side, what we have is a boundary of the river canyon to the east, and then we have the national forest to the west. And it makes it very, very difficult to really expand or open that development in that area.
And trying to stick towards what might be most interesting for your listeners is this. What follows is my opinion. It seems to me a certain percentage of one political party or the other seems devoted to the idea that humans are bad and we should shut ourselves down. We should limit growth. We should keep life as expensive and unprofitable as possible. The evidence of this is the affordable housing, the lack of rentals, the ridiculously high price to just play the game here and get a job. And so we plan to continue this breakdown by expanding on the west side, where there's not a 4-lane road for miles and miles, and there is no solving the traffic problems. I think at the beginning of the show you indicated the traffic problems are already there, and the school hasn't even got started yet.
Oh, that's 100% correct. Right outside of my office, I was counting it on the way. There's 5 river crossings when you cross from the west side to Bend. You've got one at Portland, one at Newport, one at Galveston. There's a minor one going through the Old Mill District, and then of course there's the one on Reed Market Road. And on this call for this future development, one of the things that's really called for is increasing the density on those roads. Not necessarily Portland, but and I'll get into this a little bit here, Mike. We've got this what they're calling the Central Westside Plan, where they had a meeting this last Thursday and started talking about how they could increase some of that core area density. And resoundingly, out of the survey that was taken, people said, hey, we don't really want you to do that.
Yeah, we all citizens work together from like that. Like I said, 2005 to 2008. I have the UGB map on my wall here, just to mark that I believed in my government enough to participate. And what seems to have happened is every bit of good planning by the county, by the city, by the citizen, and by the community, in other words, hundreds of people showing up, it's all been rejected for what our local newspaper is devoted to. I've kept extremely close track. They have not had a favorable article about Juniper Ridge in many years. They can only say positive things about squatting next to a dump along Century Drive.
Oh, sure.
And I don't know how to say this more tactfully, but they have land ownership.
Hello there, Central Oregon. Welcome back. Sorry about that last break, and sorry to Michael there. We here at the station, as you may know, I run the board as well as try to speak into the microphone, and I'm not a technician by training. So every now and again, I'm going to make a mistake, and I made a couple of them there. I turned off the power on the board, which that meant that I was talking to myself here for a little bit. And when we had that hard break at the bottom of the hour, it just cut Michael off, and I didn't get a chance to thank him for calling in, but I really appreciate his input and everything that he had to say. Let's see here. We might have somebody else calling in here. Hello, you're on the radio.
Yeah, Fred, this is Mike. I just wanted to touch base with
perfect.
you. I'm listening to an old radio.
Yes, sir.
And it's playing a football game instead of you.
No kidding.
So that means I can speak freely because I don't think I'm on the air.
Well, there you go. You're on KBND radio?
Yeah, I checked 3 or 4 times now.
Okay, good. Well,
hey,
here we are.
There. And I really do care a lot. All I can give to my fellow citizens is what I know, and we really need to act up in Central Oregon.
I couldn't agree more. Mike. One of the things that I say subtly here is that, I think that we really have, a call to action where some of the decisions that are being made should be made by people that have had some previous experience in either, development, construction, urban planning, traffic planning, whatever the case may be. Because what we've done actually is we've made some decisions based on emotion that haven't played out as promised. And one of them that you had mentioned in the last segment there was the Juniper Ridge project. And there were an awful lot of promises that were made by the Juniper Ridge project, but there were a couple of things that the city and the citizenry had absolutely no impact on whatsoever, which is primarily how it interfaces with ODOT and how we cross the Burlington Northern siding there. And then after that becomes the sewer.
Too, but go ahead.
And then after that, obviously, becomes the sewer and the services to the area. But there was no provision. There was provision for pulling the land into the urban growth boundary. There was provision for writing a future plan for what it would be like. But then there was no provision to allow people to get there and get back out.
Well, I happen to have been involved with that somewhat. First of all, Cooley Road is to be completed as of 2000 to Deschutes Market Road. That gives Juniper Ridge one easy, non-Burlington Northern crossing access. Plus, there were 2 more planned accesses along Deschutes Market Road. What is really, I really want to try to swing for the fences to respect your time.
Yes.
If we let a university go on the other side of Bend along Century Drive, it will block Cooley Road and Highway 97 as Central Oregon tries to cross Cooley to access the university. And yet they claim that Juniper Ridge poses a problem for Cooley and 97 when A, it's a mile away, B, ODOT's already enacted a pretty comprehensive plan for that whole area, and C, there's 5 ways that the university plan on Century Drive is blocked, not to mention the wastewater.
Well,
the wastewater is what I actually know the most about. They were going to put that gravity flow pipe through my land, alongside my land, some years ago, because it was free. I don't know if you know, the wastewater plant is closest to Juniper Ridge. It's downhill from Juniper Ridge
certainly.
to the
I know
wastewater
I know
plant.
that.
So the point is, the least expensive place to put in more wastewater capacity is Juniper Ridge because it's the closest to the wastewater treatment plant.
And it flows by gravity. Yes, sir.
OSU likes the other end of town because they can simply squat there and appropriate the capacity in the wastewater pipe and shut down all the rest of Bend's use of the wastewater. And they think they won't get charged any money for it.
I see. Yeah. Well, they don't contribute a lot to taxes. Well, Mike, if you could, my email address is fred@dukewarner. If you could send me that information, some of that information you get, I would certainly be glad to share it with some of our listeners.
Well, thanks for being there, Fred.
Well, and thank you so much for calling in today. I really appreciate your support, and keep listening and keep calling in. Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye now. Hello, this is Fred.
Hello.
Hello there. How are you today?
I'm fine, thanks. How are you, Fred?
I'm doing fine. Sounds like we're in a.
I have a couple of questions.
Yes, sir. Are you calling me on a Bluetooth?
No. I'm sorry. Well, the speaker. I don't think that should affect me.
Well, it sounds pretty awkward at this end if you're on a speakerphone.
No, I'm not. I mean, is it better?
That's a little bit better. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I took it off speaker. Okay. I've got two questions. I have my window open too, so I guess that's
okay.
One is on exchanges, real estate exchanges.
Yes, sir.
What is the there's some kind of a time limit for designation of the other property, but do you have to pick the property before the exchange is documented or not?
Yes, sir. You're asking about a 1031 tax deferred exchange.
1031 tax deferred exchange, right?
Yes, sir. The timelines on that are really straight ahead, in that you need to designate the property that you would be purchasing. So when you sell a property, from that sales date, you have 45 days to designate. Now,
right. Oh, okay, but you don't have. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And of that, you can designate up to 3 properties during that time. So
that's within 45 days after, not before.
That's right. Yeah, what you're talking about there is a reverse exchange, and I would certainly recommend that you talk to the professionals about that. I think that there is some ability to do that, but that's even more specific than the IRC code.
I really want it to be after.
Okay.
I don't understand how, if you don't even know if you're going to sell your property, how do you designate? So,
well, that's exactly right. So in theory, the way that it would go is that you actually go into contract, so you're going to get a few days between the time that you go into contract and it closes to be able to go out and shop a little bit. But from the day that it closes, you're given 45 days to designate potential properties.
It closes. Okay, good.
And then you can have up to 3 properties, so you could research more than one. So if one doesn't work out, you didn't give up your designation. And then you need to
do that within 6 months or something like that, right?
That's right, 180 days from that, or 6 months. You need to actually close the transaction. It needs to be of equal or greater value, the sales price, than the property that you sold.
To be totally tax free. If it's less, you pay the tax on whatever the difference is. But I understand
of what's exposed, and I think that you used a word there that's a very common word to use. You kind of dance around it a little bit in semantics, but it's a tax deferred exchange. It's not a tax free exchange.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So no, which is fine, but it means that it doesn't mean that tax is waived. It just means that it's deferred for a later date.
I understand that absolutely. But the other question I have,
yes, sir,
is the on the federal tax code anyway. It's income, any gain is based on or is taxed on a capital gains rate, which is now 25%. Is that the idea?
Well, I believe that it's actually a little bit lower now. I think it's 15 right now, but they're talking about bumping it up.
So it's not 25 yet. They'd have to, the Congress would have to pass a statute or an act, wouldn't they?
Well, there's some discussion about that long-term gain tax being bumped up. It's anywhere, I've heard the figure anywhere from 25 to 35%. There's just been discussion. There would be some discussion on that, but But yes, that affects a number of things. That affects real estate. That affects stock portfolios.
Sure.
It affects a number of long-term properties, which, that's kind of the one thing, from a real estate perspective, that's the one thing that sort of displaced the heirs of a farm or a ranch. Let's say mom and dad had a big farm and a ranch, and it was worth a couple $1,000,000. Well, then all of a sudden, when it changes hands to the heirs, the taxable event is incurred, and they want to have, now 15%. But if that gets moved up to 25 or 30%, well, 30% of a couple $1,000,000 is a big ticket, and that forces the family then to sell the property. They were not able to keep it,
or at least some of it, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that I'm certain that the other people that are affected by that too, which is they don't really get much attention, are those people that have their retirement accounts. So,
right.
You're retired, you take your money out, that's what a traditional IRA does, is that you pay taxes when you take the money out. So if that tax rate is increased, that means that some of our retired people that are living on fixed income at that point in time would actually be paying a higher tax rate on the money that they took out. Now, again, I am not a tax professional.
I understand.
I would encourage you to call a tax professional.
Roger that. Thanks a lot, Fred.
Well, thank you so much for the call in today. Really appreciate it.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Well, folks, there we go. We had a couple of different topics to discuss today, which are really quite interesting. So when we come back, I'll try to talk a little bit about this Westside group. You can always call us here at the station, 541-388-1110, and I look forward to talking to you after the break. Thanks so much for tuning in. Welcome back. You're at Talk Real Estate. I'm Fred Johnson. I'm your host. And thank you so much for tuning in today. You can always call us here at the station, 541-388-1110. Right before the break, we had a couple of interesting discussions there, and I wanted to thank those folks again for calling in today, and just kind of wanted to touch base back on a couple of them. The tax-deferred 1031 exchange, that is a great vehicle for those people that have an investment-grade property that would like to move their equity in one property into another property without incurring a taxable event. With all of those style of issues, talk to your tax people. There are some what are called accommodators or facilitators that can help you facilitate or accommodate that 1031 exchange, thereby being in compliance with the Internal Revenue Code so that you do not incur a taxable event and you're able to move forward. Great vehicle, and it really helps people keep money working. And the way that it affects us here in Bend is that there's a number of folks that either do live in Bend or anticipate living in Bend, and it grants them the ability to be able to move their equity in it from another market into our market area. And so that's the reason why sometimes we see some activity that, based on our, I think one of the sayings, it's almost getting a little bit passé, but does that property pencil? Sometimes, we'll sharpen our pencil as tight as we can and try to get something to cash flow, and somebody will come in from outside of the area and pay a price more than that, and it doesn't even come close any longer. But that's one of the ways that happens. The other item is this Juniper Ridge. We kind of mentioned it a little bit. We mentioned some of the development, and what I would call out or shout out to absolutely anybody that would listen is if there's someone out there that would like to get involved in the process, maybe even run for city council or something along that line, that has some background in development, in systems, in traffic planning, in urban planning. We really need some of those people to be active and involved, because a lot of the decisions are being made, if you will, by sort of the vocal few that overlook, the real dynamics of how the process works and what's going together. And there's a fair amount of government to the whole thing. There was an article about Juniper Ridge and the urban growth boundary and what it's going to take to increase that capacity, the sewage capacity, and those sort of things out there. And there almost needs to be a little bit of interaction between the city and the county to make that happen. But then there's some guidelines written into the urban growth boundary expansion that doesn't allow for the city to plan for that future growth that's going to happen outside. So it seems to be a little governmental flaw, but it would be really, really helpful if there were people that were involved in that process that understood, and it can be from, hopefully from all angles, but at least bare minimum from the mechanical and the development issue of what it takes to increase that flow and increase that development and allow that to happen. Because as our town continues to grow, we're going to have the need, particularly with adding new breweries every other week, and that we're going to have the need for increased sewage capacity. With the population comes the need for additional transportation. And, those two issues really don't seem to be mentioned that much. Don't really seem to be getting the emphasis and the direction that they so rightfully deserve. And, as an example of that, what I'm going to do is share with you an article that just came out yesterday in the Bend Bulletin by Tyler Leeds. It was about a plan for Bend's Westside takes shape. And this is a group of 23 community advisors, as they're called, met on Thursday to talk about what sort of transportation improvements they would like to see. And, some of the land use area for the property that's west of the Deschutes River, all the way north to Portland, down south to Reed Market Road, to Mount Washington Drive, and then as far east as the Parkway. So this was the only area that was even being looked at for this transportation plan, which it's great. But, I really got a kick out of there were 1,325 folks that responded to the survey that was put out. But the survey, it was interesting. There was a little bit of a debate on that with the OSU Cascades selection as well as the Truth and Sight folks, and there was some discrepancy, and many of you may have read it in the newspaper, about when you're going to put a survey together, how do you pose the questions so that they don't necessarily steer the response? And sort of a similar deal was given here. It says the lease disc plan. So the survey was asked, which of the three increasingly urban plans do you prefer? So it didn't give the option that I don't prefer any of them, but basically resoundingly 3.14 out of 5. So what that tells me is that we had a good percentage, 60% of the folks that favored the least amount of impact. And so all three phases allowed for taller buildings. They wanted taller buildings out near Century Drive, taller buildings along southwest, on the north side of southwest Colorado. And, when we get to sort of looking at, I mentioned it earlier in the show, that the traffic backs up fairly significantly along Newport Avenue already. And, Galveston Street is another one of those places where there's a crossing of the river there at the south end of Drake Park. And by increasing the density and increasing the area to the west side of the river, it sort of creates a problem on two sides. One, in the event, heaven forbid, of a huge forest fire or some huge calamity on the west side, it doesn't allow those people to be able to evacuate the area. And more importantly, it doesn't allow the emergency response vehicles to be able to get into that area. And that really seems to be, at least in my way of looking at things, a little bit of a key issue. People need to be able to get in and out. We need to be able to provide ample services. There needs to be a health and safety component that goes into that future development. And just talking about, well, I don't care. Do you think we ought to go 3 stories or 4 stories? Is 5 stories too much? Doesn't really address the key issue, is if we're going to have residential structures here that are 5 stories tall, basically what that means is that increases the density and the number of people that are going to be using this area, but doesn't do anything to increase the road width or the service to that area. Let me see. We've got somebody here coming in. Hello, you're on the air.
Yeah, Fred, this is Mike. I just wanted to provide one quick thought about this.
I'm still with you, Mike.
Delay. It's much easier to destroy than create. So the delaying of the UGB using delay as if the Westside commercialization was okay. That's all they need to make $1,000 a month on their home equity, assuming they own a home in Central Oregon, as they pump the land values up by delaying the UGB.
Well,
You see what I'm saying?
it's costing money on all fronts. It's costing the taxpayers money because there's consultants that are being retained during that same time.
Committee members on those staff and boards and things like that.
Yes, sir.
If they own a home, their equity value goes up about $1,000 a month.
Wow, that's a pretty significant figure.
Please pencil it out. You'll see that surprisingly it's true. As our land bloats in cost, these people on these committees